بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our Friday service. Even before we start the sermon, I want to make two announcements. One is that you would have heard that Shamima Begum is going to be allowed to come to the UK to fight her appeal. And you may remember that we were a part of the struggle to make sure that she has a proper hearing. This is not a justification of what she did or the ideas she holds, but her right to a fair hearing. The second thing is, please pray for all those who are sick or who may have problems, particularly our Vice President, Izazillahi Malik Sahib. He is ill and in hospital. So I ask everyone to say special prayers for his recovery. He's a very active member and a valuable asset of the Jamaat. And we pray that Allah gives him speedy and complete recovery. We've been considering slavery over the past few weeks. And so today we will continue, and I hope today will be the last sermon on this topic. And today we will actually deal with two things, and that is physical slavery, that is buying and selling of human beings, and also bonded labor. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I will only recite some verses of chapter 90 for you. The rest I will simply read the English translation. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةُ فُكَّ رَقَبَةٍ أَوْ إِطْعَامٌ فِي يَوْمٍ ذِي مَسْغَبَةٍ يَتِيمًا ذَا مَقْرَبَةٍ أَوْ مِسْكِينًا ذَا مَتْرَبَةٍ ثُمَّ كَانَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ. As I said, this is chapter 90, verses 11 to 17. But he attempts not the uphill road. And what will make you understand what is the uphill road? It is to free a slave, or to feed in a day of hunger, and often nearly related, or the poor man lying in the dust. Then he is of those who believe and exhort one another to patience and exhort one another to mercy. So it is an uphill struggle to do these things. And it is easy for people to say, I don't believe in giving money, sending money to various places in the world where there are poor people. Why don't they get off and do something themselves? There's coronavirus and people in Ivory Coast are dying, but we don't want to feed them. Why? Because this is not our policy. Then I will just read the English translation of chapter 2. It is not righteousness that you turn your faces east or west. Righteous is the one who believes in Allah, the last day, and the angels and the book and the prophets, and gives away wealth out of love for him. Gives away wealth out of love for him to the near of kin, and orphans and needy and the wayfarer and those who ask. And those who ask. So if someone sends you an email or a text message from a poor country saying, please help me, you're not supposed to say no. And to set slaves free and keep up prayer and pays the poor rate, and the performers of their promise when they make a promise, and the patient in distress and affliction and in the time of conflict. These are they who are truthful, and these are they who keep their duty. And marry among, that was chapter 2, verse 177. Next, chapter 24, verse 32. And marry those among you who are single, and those who are fit among your male slaves or female slaves. Listen. Those who are fit among your male slaves or female slaves. How many male slaves people married in the United States? They raped females. If they are needy, Allah will make them free from want out of His grace. And Allah is ample giving. No. And then chapter 24, verse 33. And let those who can't find a match keep chaste until Allah makes them free from want out of His grace. And those of your slaves who ask to be freed, give them freedom. If you know any good in them, and give them of the wealth of Allah which He has given you. So if someone asks for freedom, you not only just free them, but you give them something as a start in life. And compel not your slave girls into prostitution, which they desire to keep when they desire to keep chaste, in order to seek the frail goods of this world's life. And whoever compels them, then surely after their compulsion, Allah is forgiving and merciful. Sadaqallahul Aliyyul Azim. And this is not just paper that you write nice things on. The hadith of the Holy Prophet, he said, a person who has a slave girl and trains her in the best manner and gives her the best education, then sets her free and marries her, his reward will be double. Then sets her free and marries her. Jabir ibn Abdullah reported, the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, enjoined good treatment of slaves, and he would say, feed them from the same food that you eat. Not this is rubbish, this is going off, so just give it to the servant or the slave or whatever. That's good enough for them, not for me. Feed them from the same food that you eat. Clothe them from the same clothes that you wear. And do not torture the creation of Allah Almighty. There's an incident when a companion of the Holy Prophet was walking along, and he was walking with someone who was wearing exactly the same clothes as he was. And he was asked, who is he? And he said, he's my slave. And the man said, what? He said, he's my slave. And he said, but he's wearing the same clothes as you are. And he said, yes. Once I called him a bad name. And he complained to the Holy Prophet. And the Holy Prophet called me and admonished me. And said, don't you know that you're supposed to give them the same food that you eat and to wear the same clothes as you do? But of course, the biggest thing is the last sermon of the Holy Prophet, when he said the Arab has no superiority over non-Arab, and non-Arab has no superiority over Arab. And white has no superiority over black, and the black doesn't have any superiority over white. So no one has any superiority for any reason, for color, for creed, for caste, for whatever. And notice one thing. This is general. This didn't separate free people and slaves. And there are many examples. Hazrat Bilal was a slave. When it was decided that our Muslims' call to prayer would be azan, everyone wanted to be the first one to call the azan. They wanted to be the muezzin, the caller to prayer of the Prophet's mosque. But that honor was given to Hazrat Bilal Raziyallahu Ta'ala. And people objected. And you would wonder, they objected, was it because he was black? Was it because he came from a group of slaves? No. Their objection was that he is not an Arab and he cannot pronounce certain letters. He cannot pronounce certain letters correctly. I can't remember which letters they were now. And you know what the Holy Prophet said? He said, for Allah, what Bilal pronounces is correct. And the Holy Prophet gave Hazrat Bilal prominence over all his companions. He was the keeper of the Holy Prophet's purse and his household finances. He was the Minister of Finance or Chancellor of the Exchequer in terms of United Kingdom. And when he came, even someone as prominent as Hazrat Umar Raziyallahu Ta'ala would stand up and address him as Sayyidna Bilal, my Lord and Master Bilal, and would not sit until Hazrat Bilal sat down. Did this happen in Australia to Aborigines when Captain Cook arrived? Did this happen to Red Indians when founding fathers arrived? Did this happen to the Africans who were taken as slaves to the United States? Did any of them, for example, act on this? Marry those who were fit from among you, male slaves and female slaves? Who did that? But the interesting thing is, most of the Muslim empires that we talk about were founded by slaves. Their founders were purchased as a slave and then trained and tested, and they rose through the ranks, and eventually they became kings. The Ghulams of the Abbasi Khilafah, they eventually found the Ghaznavi Empire. And every Muslim, well, certainly from India and Pakistan, has heard of Mahmud of Ghazna. He came from slave stock. I think if I remember rightly, Salahuddin Ayyubi, the great Saladin, came from the slave stock. And these slaves, this Mahmud of Ghazni, the empire he ruled consisted of Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and parts of India. He was purchased as a slave. Mamluks of Egypt were slaves. Is there any example in Christendom of slaves becoming kings? Ottomans, everyone knows about Ottomans. They ruled Turkey until 1919 or so. Sultanate Osmania, they came from slave stock. If you go to Topkapi Palace, you'll see an inscription on the harem. It says that the queen would send out people to purchase for her from Europe the most beautiful and the most intelligent girls. They would come, they would reside in the palace. Did Aborigines of Australia reside in anyone's palace? Did the slaves in United States, did they reside in someone's palace? And they would be trained in politics and literature and poetry. And then every year they would sit an exam, like 12 plus in the UK. And then after some years, the most intelligent and the most beautiful girl, you know what would happen to her? The queen would marry her off to her son. Did this happen to the African slave girls taken to the United States? Or the Aborigine females? Or for that matter, did this happen in South America? Did the Portuguese and the Spanish and the French treat the indigenous population in this way? And there was a whole dynasty in India which lasted almost 1 century, and its name is Khandane-Gholama, the family of slaves, the dynasty of slaves. They ruled India for 100 years. And it was again the same thing. The whole crop of slaves would come, they would be trained, and they'd compete. And then eventually, the most capable of them would become the next ruler. It wasn't leadership, kingship wasn't hereditary. It depended on how good you were in politics and military matters and so on. Now, on July 4th, 1776, there was a unanimously approved document called Declaration of Independence in the United States, which said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are liberty, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness." Did this apply to the slaves who were brought from Africa? Actually, some were white slaves as well. Did it apply to any slaves, particularly to the black slaves? You still had slavery. Despite the declaration, all men are created equal. And there was litigation and court cases with slave owners saying, "He is my property. If I want to, I can kill him, and you can't charge me with murder. If I break my table, will you charge me with breaking a table?" It wasn't until 1863 that Abraham Lincoln signed the Declaration of Emancipation. But what did it do? It was just a piece of paper saying you can't buy or sell anyone and they're all free. It was just a piece of paper. What rights did it give them? British abolished slavery in 1833. In fact, it's interesting to say that the, I forget the name of the act, Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 did not apply to India, but to the rest of the empire. And French abolished it in 1848. But the question is this. Did the situation of these people improve in any way at all? When British abolished slavery, they actually compensated slave owners for loss of property. So although slavery was abolished, those people were still the property which someone had taken. It's no different from nationalizing railways and saying to the shareholders, well, here is £100 because I've taken your property. And that is the point that is missed. Islam said they are human beings. They're equal to you. What's the point of saying you can't buy and sell humans? Why have we got Black Lives Matter movement in the United States? If what Abraham Lincoln, what he did, got rid of slavery. Do black people, or let's say non-white, that's a more accurate expression, because that includes Red Indians, that includes other South American nations. Did they get the rights equal to the others? If they did, why do we have this movement, Black Lives Matter? What Islam did was, it went the opposite way. It said, first, establish the fact that slaves are human beings. Second, give them rights. A slave, I read out a verse of the Holy Quran, if I can find it. It says, and if your slave asks for freedom, give it to them. It said, you can marry slaves. Not just girls, but men. Which was the important thing. This is why in Islam, although in name they were slaves, they actually ruled India. This is why in Islam, although in name they were slaves, they ruled Egypt. This is why, although in name they were slaves, in Islam they ruled Turkey and many other places. What the rest of the world did was to abolish slavery in name, but not give them any rights. Oh, you are now free. Free for what? Free to die. Free to remain illiterate. Free not to get a job. Free not to be able to earn any money. But the important thing is, when the West abolished slavery, it was replaced by bonded labor. Oh, we are not buying this person. This is a contract. This person is going to work for us for 10 years. He won't be allowed to leave. He won't be allowed to go anywhere. We'll house him and feed him, but we'll only pay him at the end of 10 years. How is this different from slavery? Slaves were accommodated. Slaves were fed. The only difference was that if that poor man or woman survived 10 years, they got a little bit of money. This was how people from India ended up in Trinidad and Guyana and Suriname and French Guiana and so on. It was bonded labor. They just changed the label. Now you didn't say, I am buying this slave. You said, this man is entering into a contract of employment for me for 20 years. That he'll only get paid at the end of that time. So how is that different from slavery? The name is different. Did you give them any rights? That is the question. Islam gave them rights, equal rights with their masters. As I told you, give them to eat what you eat. Give them to wear what you wear. If you see someone is capable, male or female, marry them. And not only that, as I read out, it gave slaves the right to ask, to demand freedom, which they did. Many did. It made it the state's duty to buy and free slaves. It made it an individual's duty to buy and free slaves. Abdur Rahman Auf, radiallahu anhu, one companion of the Holy Prophet, he bought and freed 10,000 slaves. Is there any example of that in Christendom? Did anyone in America, did Captain Cook or any of his compatriots do this? It allowed slaves to marry their masters. It allowed slaves to become kings and queens. And it said, no free man can become a slave. No free man can become a slave. You had prisoners of war, and they were the only ones. But the Battle of Badr shows that they could pay compensation and get freedom. They could teach Muslims to read and write and get their freedom. And if some couldn't do either, then the Holy Prophet said, well, set them free as a favor. What matters is whether people have rights, not what you put on a nice act of parliament or bill of Congress. You want people to think you're nice. You don't want people to think that Britain or United States or Australia are nasty, horrible people who mistreat blacks or browns, people of color or people who belong to certain castes and so on. But the question is, what do you do in practice to implement that? Nothing. Nothing was done to emancipate the slaves. Only Islam. Remember, slavery was in every single religion and place. Christianity, Judaism, and so on. But only in Islam were they given rights, including the right to freedom and including the right to get married to their master or mistress. Those who criticize Islam for not abolishing slavery, Islam did. It took steps so that gradually slavery will be eliminated. It did do that for practical reasons. But for important reasons, it gave slaves the same rights as free people. But if you say, we are so nice, we abolished slavery, we gave slaves freedom, we gave Aborigines of Australia freedom, then please explain to me. Please explain to me why did this poor man lying on the ground begged, saying, please, I cannot breathe. Please, I cannot breathe. Please, I cannot breathe. And the hearts of these great people who bestowed freedom upon him didn't melt, didn't soften. The question I was asked was, why didn't Islam abolish slavery? Islam did abolish slavery, but it did something greater than that which no one ever has done at the time or since, and that is it gave everyone equal rights. And I go back. If they are fit, marry your slaves, male or female. If a slave asks for freedom, give them freedom. Did any other legislature say this? Did any other government say this? Did any government enact laws to say slaves are human beings? They are not property. As I explained to you, in the United States, there was much litigation to show that slaves are property and not human beings, and an owner may treat them as he likes. Next week, this khutbah has been slightly longer than I intended, but I wanted to complete the topic. Next week, we will, inshallah, move on to another topic. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil Azim. ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات وذكر الحكيم إنه تعالى جواد كريم ملك بر رحيم. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وجعلنا منهم واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا منهم. عباد الله رحمكم الله. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah. Qad qamatis salah, qamatis salah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. Amin. Inna anzalnahu fi lailatul qadr wa ma adraka ma lailatul qadr. Lailatul qadr khairun min alfi shahr. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده.
ربنا لك الحمد.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده.
ربنا لك الحمد.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أستغفر الله. أستغفر الله. اللهم منك السلام. تبارك ربنا آتنا. Thank you for joining us for our Friday service. Our next broadcast is tomorrow, Saturday at 9 o'clock, which is Lessons in Islam. And tomorrow we'll be discussing the concept of Sawm or fasting. These are essentially lessons for people who newly join Islam. But in going through, even I have discovered many new things. So I hope you will join us there in English only. And then on Sunday at 9 a.m., we have Call of the Messiah from 9 to 9:30 in Urdu and from 9:30 to 10 in English. With the prayer that until we meet again, Allah keeps all of you safe and sound and free from harm. I take my leave of you. Assalamu alaikum. Khuda Hafiz. Goodbye.